I just wonder, are you interested in true crime stories? As a nation, we are fascinated by them, so much so that there are three true crime TV channels in the UK that reach over 5 million each month. I love these stories. I've spoken to a man who knows what makes a serial killer tick. Detective David Swindle is bringing his shows, The Makings of a Murderer, to Southend next month. And I caught up with him earlier before the show and asked him how the idea of the show came about.
I was a former detective, a senior detective in the police dealing with murder investigations, high-profile cases, and I left the police. I retired. I hate that word, retired, and I set up a new life after the police. And what I do is I do independent reviews for families that have lost loved ones, but I also do media stuff, and I appear in some crime programmes. And I was doing a small sort of tour of the UK, speaking about killers. And then it was in November last year, an Essex company, Canvey Island, the entertainers approached me and asked me if I would do a bigger one, a bigger UK tour called The Makings of a Murderer. And it's certainly a big tour with 120 plus venues throughout the UK.
Wow, that's incredible. How do you feel chatting on stage? Because is it very different to your career, really? I mean, I know you were chatting to and trying to get the truth out of murderers and talking to your detectives, of course, but how different is it for you to be up there on stage?
Well, I have a fair background in the media, doing stuff live in Crime Watch. I was on the old Crime Watch 5 times for the Peter Tobin case. In fact, that's the guy that killed Dinah McNichol, the Essex girl. Its body was found in the garden in Margate in Kent. So for me, speaking in the TV, speaking in the radio to you, it's fine. I'm used to that. But you're right, it's a totally different concept, standing as a one-man show on a stage, speaking to some of the audiences we've had: Glasgow 2,100, Manchester 1,300, Liverpool 1,200. Some big audiences. But for me, I'm speaking about something that I've got a passion about, and the people that are coming to see me are people that have got a real interest in what I do. And they've got a real interest in, sadly, they've got an interest in true crime, which everyone has. But the big thing I spin it a bit too is that, there's a lot of focus about murderers and a lot of focus about crime, but sometimes we forget about the victims. And I lace this through the show about the victims. And it was interesting, actually. I was at one of the venues and I came out and I says, for every one of these murderers, there's a victim. In the case of serial killers, there's more than one victim. We should never forget about the victims. And the crowd all started clapping and some people stood up. And that was really interesting for me, really interesting. That was a very powerful thing.
No, you're absolutely right, of course. And we've seen such a rise in true crime programmes on the television. I mean, why do you think people are drawn to things like this?
I think there are people that have always been interested in crime and investigations and murder. And the big thing is that with the advent of social media, with TV, with people being more, in this society we're in, people rightly so want to know more about it. And the thing I say, we should never forget about these killers, never forget about them. Never forget what they've done to the victims. And that is a big thing. And I'm amazed that there's so many people come along to see me. And I'm delighted, that so many people come to the venues. And we also have with the size of the audience, you can't have a question and answer thing because it focuses on the person and other people round about get bored with that. So we have a facility where people put in questions online. Right. And I've got a social media girl, Catherine, and she picks them up. And I come out after the break and I read out some of them and deal with some of the questions and thread them in. And then we have a photo shop at the end where they can get a picture taken, a meet and greet. And a lot of people ask me questions then as well. So there's a genuine interest with people researching, rightly so, inquisitive minds about what makes a killer, why do people kill.
And of course, you were the detective who brought serial killer Peter Tobin to justice. Could you tell me a little bit about Peter and how you caught him?
Peter Tobin is a horrible guy. I mean, he's now dead, and he travelled through the UK. But what happened was, I was the senior investigating officer for the murder of a Polish girl, Polish student, Angelika Kluk. She was murdered in a church in Glasgow and raped, and her body was buried under the church, concealed under the church. And during that investigation, very quickly I thought, this person has done this, and it was Peter Tobin, has killed before. He was 60. You don't get to that age without killing. So I set up a thing called Operation Anagram to look at his life, and we tracked his life right through, and it resulted in finding the bodies of 2 young women that had been missing for over 15 years. Vicky Hamilton missing from Scotland, and Dinah McNichol, the Essex young girl who went missing while she was at a pot festival, and the bodies were buried in his garden in Kent. So that was in a nutshell. I mean, there's a lot more than that, but that's an overview of it. And it's something I'm really proud of what I set up, and we tested it. But it's killed other people, but we've never found out. But I'm proud of setting it up and getting some sort of closure and justice for these young women. But I'm sad we never get any more bodies.
Sadie here with you through till 6. Lots to talk about still on the programme today, but we've got a great interview on the way here. Well, you're halfway through it, because my big guest on the show today is David Swindle, a detective who's taken his show Makings of a Murderer across the UK, and the next chance to see it is at the Southend Cliffs Pavilion on 28th of July next month. We continue our conversation on what we can expect from the show and whether those he's investigated over the years have certain traits.
Now that and the pushing out the promotional material for this, one of the things that I say, and you've probably seen it online, they're controlling, they're conniving, they're cunning, they're charming, and I hate to say they're clever. And it's all about power for these people. It's the power of taking a life away. It's the power of controlling the police investigations. For them, the commonality is control and power and domination. And that is, some of them get away with it for so long before they're caught. And most of them, it's evident, like so the Ian Brady, the Moors murderer, and Tobin, they'll speak, they're narcissists, they'll speak about themselves.
Right. It's quite frightening. Has the job affected you at all? I mean, it must be quite hard to deal with at times, or are you quite good at separating yourself from it?
That's interesting. That question comes up a lot, and I can understand why when they hear me on the stage speaking about the cases and the things I do and the challenges and the fast-moving investigations, I do look back and say, how did I manage to cope with this when things were moving fast, huge investigations, media pressure on me? I did. It's like every job. You manage to cope and you manage to try and separate the challenges from your normal life. But the things that I saw, the things that I dealt with, there's things I'll never forget. And I suppose a coping mechanism as well is that, I left the police, retired in inverted commas, 2011, and for the last 12 years, I've got my own company when I'm doing stuff for victims abroad, people that are killed abroad, trying to, review cases for families and the media side. So I think that's a kind of coping mechanism in a way that I'm still using my skills. What you learn and develop in the police, you'll never forget. And exactly the things you mentioned there, some things you'll never forget about the horrors, dealing with victims, seeing the actual murderers, see what they've done to people, having to speak to families. There's huge challenges. But every job's got a challenge, but the police has significant challenges.
Yeah, and I should imagine that going on behind the scenes of big cases like you've dealt with, when watching true crime, it seems like it's all sorted out in a few weeks. We watch the television, it's like, and then they found this, then found, but in reality, it must be a much longer process.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, yeah. I tongue-in-cheek watch some of these programmes, and they're always solved within one episode, or if it's a complicated one, 2 episodes. That's not the realities of it. There's so many things there. There's so many facets to policing, and it continually evolves. It changes and changes. And I joined the police in 1977, and I think about cases that I was involved in then when we didn't have DNA, we didn't have technology we have nowadays, and I think, what would it be like if we had DNA technology, CCTV, things like that? And it's quite sad when I think back that, people didn't have it to investigate. We tried to use the skills we had at the time. But with the changes in technology, there is still successes for historical cases, cold case reviews. There's been a lot of successes regarding retrospective and historical detections, and what Peter Tobin did to the victims, Vicky Hamilton, Dinah McNichol, they were cold case. That was something that he did years ago and thought he was going to get away with. So the truth always comes round, but not always. There's some cases in the past that, because there's no exhibits left and other aspects of it, that we may never know who killed the poor victims.
Which is awful. Is there, when you watch television and you watch the dramas of the crime drama, is there one series maybe that is more truthful than others? I mean, I look at Happy Valley. Is that more? Is there one that's more real to life, real life than others?
I tend, it is like a busman's holiday kind of thing for me, watching crime dramas. I do, if there's something that's on a particular programme or a drama that I have an interest in, about a case or maybe the way they're going to portray it, then I'll watch it. And there was one in particular that was about Dennis Nielsen, the killer that killed at least 15 young men in Muswell Hill. Absolutely horrible case. And Dennis Nielsen's a really clever guy. And there's a bit, David Tennant plays him in that drama, and it's a very, very chilling interview where you can see David Tennant. He is Dennis Nielsen in the police interview, and he's controlling the interview, and he's so eloquent on it. And that's a chilling one. I actually mentioned that, I touch on that on the show, just a little bit about it, and everybody, I can see the reaction of the audience, they can all relate to that. And that is something on that drama that I really, really think about, the way that was reenacted and played. But there's lots of good stuff out there. There's also lots of over-sensational stuff. And I speak about the killers, focusing the killers. There's some of these programmes that are there, and they just talk about the killer, and they forget that there's victims there. But in the main, there's a good balance, and we should never forget what they've done. And that's why I participate in true crime programmes, provided the balance is right and I can narrate about a case.
Sounds so fascinating. Now, this show, is there an age limit on the show?
Yes, I think it's 18. It is 18.
Right.
Because there's no graphic stuff. I'm not showing anything graphic because that's unfair. But I do speak about some horrors, some horrible situations on it. But in the main, the audience they're fascinated by it, and it's a recommended age. I think that's the way the theatres portray it. And the big thing too is people come to that and they share. They share stuff on social media. Social media is a big thing for what I do regarding the media work, the makings of a murderer work, and also the live cases I'm involved in reviewing in Spain. So people can look at my website, davidswindle.com, and you'll see all the work that I'm doing, and you'll see the stuff that people are posting and some of the things. We put some clips together and put them out there on the website, on my YouTube channel, and it gives people an idea. So what I love about the people that come to the show, they don't just sit and sponge it and take it up, absorb it. They respond and they feed up and they contribute on Twitter and other social media platforms. So it's a fascinating concept, and I'm delighted to be involved and delighted. Yeah, it's hectic. You found a bit of difficulty trying to track me down. harder than
Yeah,
a serial killer.
absolutely.
Yeah, but it's there's a lot of challenges geographically getting around the various venues. But for me, on a personal note, it's really worthwhile, and I take great pleasure in sharing my experience and also interacting with people that rightly so have an interest in what these horrible killers have done to their victims.
That's David Swindle, detective, taking his show Makings of a Murderer right across the UK, and you can see it at Southend's Cliff Pavilion on 28th of July next month. Sounds quite fascinating, doesn't it?